Good afternoon. I'm Lant Pritchett. Very sorry I'm not there with you, but it comes from a commitment to education. I actually have to teach class at precisely the time of this seminar, so I'm recording this and will join as soon as my class is over. I just wanted to give a brief overview of what the system diagnostic exercise is that we're doing within the RISE program. The RISE program is a large research program with 6 country studies that have multi-year commitment to researching effective education systems in India, Pakistan, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Vietnam, and Indonesia. So I just want to say a few quick things. First, what is a system diagnostic and why would one want to do one? Second, what's the fundamental conceptual framework of our system diagnostic? And third, where we are in that process, after which you'll hear from the people that have actually been doing it, and then we'll have time for discussion of what an ideal system diagnostic might look like. So, the first is what I mean by a system diagnostic is that we push beyond the proximate determinants of learning. We all know that in order for there to be a successful experiences in schooling and successful teaching and learning experiences, there need to be successful interactions between teachers and students, and it all starts from the classroom, and then one can push a causal chain backwards from that point. What needs to happen? Typically, we break the sort of inputs of a successful learning experience into two conceptual baskets. One are what I call thin inputs, following the anthropologist Clifford Geertz's distinction between the thin and the thick. And the thin inputs are the things that a computer and a bureaucracy can easily keep track of, basically. It's numbers of schools, numbers of desks, numbers of teachers, their ages, hard, narrow, objective facts about the inputs into the production process. And then there's what I call the thick inputs. Is your teacher kind? Is your teacher concerned? Is your teacher capable? Words that we have found through experience and evidence are deeply important to the teaching and learning experience, and yet very hard for any standard bureaucracy and or computer system to keep track of them. So the system diagnostic pushes one causal step backwards. It says, okay, we can observe more or less a variety of learning outcomes across a wide variety of things, of the goals of an educational process. We can observe some well, some less well, some with more difficulty, the proximate determinants. A system diagnostic asks the question, what are the determinants of the proximate determinants? If we observe that there aren't desks, or if we observe that the textbooks are too hard, or if we observe that the teachers are absent, why is that? What are the choices actors are making in the context of the overall system of education that would lead to that level of proximate determinants? So most diagnostics that exist are either output diagnostics that are very limited in the sense that they don't actually create a diagnostic. We know that learning outcomes are good, or learning outcomes are bad, or learning outcomes are strong in this dimension, learning outcomes are weak in that dimension, but that doesn't tell us what to fix. Or most countries probably have management information systems in which they manage and control the thin inputs, which is a necessary component of a functional system. But it's only one component of the system, and often often not the most important determinant of actual learning outcomes. So we're trying to push for a system diagnostic that says, why is it that we observe the level of the proximate determinants that we observe? So, and we need a system diagnostic because education systems are full of people. They're full of students who are learners, they're full of parents who are concerned about the students, they're full of teachers, they're full of middle-level bureaucrats, they're full of politicians. They're all determined by people, and people have purposes. They do things because they're trying to accomplish goals, and they make choices to advance their purposes, and those choices are constrained by the system they face. So our working hypothesis is that you will accomplish a functional education system when the system constrains and promotes choices by actors that lead to good outcomes. That's a working hypothesis. So if we wanted to measure what a functional system would look like, we have to measure how the system constrains and promotes choices by the many, many individuals that are part of an overall education system. So now we want an education diagnostic and a system diagnostic that has certain features. One, we want it to be systemic. We want it to actually incorporate all the relevant actors in the system. Politicians are a relevant actor at times and over certain decisions. Principals are key actors in the management of the school. Teachers are obviously the key actor in teaching and learning processes. Parents are key actors in what they choose to induce their children to do. The students themselves are key actors. So we need to be systemic. Second, we want it to be functional. That is, we want it to be relevant to the key functions of an education system. So there's a subcomponent of an education system that's about teachers. How are teachers trained? How are teachers recruited? How are teachers hired? How are teachers transferred? How are teachers promoted? How are teachers compensated? How are teachers supported with in-service training and support? All of those things form a subsystem of an education system around teachers. That's the functional component, so we want our analytical and our functional to line up. Third, we would like it to be based on evidence. What is the evidence about functional systems? And are we actually measuring the components of systems that there is evidence that if those functional components are right, systems work better, and if those functional components are wrong, systems work worse? And finally, I think key is that we allow it to, the system is built to assess both the de jure, do the policies exist, and the de facto, what are the actual practices? Because in many countries around the world, the issue is not that they haven't adopted exactly best practice policies, it's that they don't have the capability, willpower, or wherewithal to implement those best practices, so the actual practice and the adopted de jure practice diverge, and the problem is how in the system, what actually is being done and what actually is working. So the intellectual foundation of our conceptual framework is a 4x4 diagnostic of accountability that it builds off of the accountability framework of the World Development Report 2004 and has been sort of modified and accommodated for our purposes. But it's a 4x4 in the sense that we think of accountability as a relationship among relevant actors. So there are 4 relationships. There's a relationship called politics between citizens and the state. There's a relationship called compact between the executive functions of the state, budget allocation, task allocation, and implementing organizations, which may or may not be state organizations. There's a relationship within organizations between the management of the organization and the frontline workers, which we call management. And then there's a relationship between the students and parents as direct recipients of educational services and the organizations providing those services, which we call client power. And we can call it direct citizen power. I don't want to be distracted by the word client, because all of this is intended to model both public and private provision in a neutral way. So those are the 4 relationships of accountability. And then we want to say, is the relationship of accountability strong or weak? To say strong or weak, we have to have a framework of what a strong relationship looks like. And we believe there are 4 design elements of a relationship of accountability. One is delegation. What is the agent asked to do? Is it clear? Is it coherent? Is it feasible? Second, what's the finance and support received by the agent in order to carry out the function? If I delegate you to send a rocket ship to Mars, I better provide you with the budget, the input, and the scientific expertise to fly to Mars. Otherwise, I can't hold you accountable for not going to Mars. So the finance and support has to be commensurate with the delegation. The third is information. Is there a way of measuring and how is it measured whether or not the task that was delegated is accomplished? And fourth is motivation. Is the agent motivated to accomplish the task that's delegated by the outcomes? Is there a feedback from performance of the agent to the motivation of the agent that would induce them So those are the four relationships of each of the four relationships of accountability, which leads to and this is a diagrammatic illustration of that the system operates as system. So when you look at a system, the parts cohere or they don't cohere, and a weakness in any one part of the system can cause failures in other parts of the system. One of the principles of system analysis is that just because the tire is flat doesn't mean the hole is on the bottom, because the tire acts, an inner tube acts as a system. If there's a hole anywhere, the air goes out of the system, and you can't diagnose the flat tire merely by pointing and saying, here's the proximate problem, the tire's flat on the ground. So anywhere it could well be, if teachers are absent, the problem isn't teachers, the problem is politics, or the problem is compact, or the problem is management. So you can't diagnose the system merely by looking at the proximate outcomes. The second is a tabular sort of illustration of the same 4x4. Each of these four relationships exists in every situation. There's politics, there's compact, there's management, and there's client power. And those can be stronger or weaker with respect to the objectives of the education system. So, and parts can be strong and parts can be weak. And so what we want is a diagnostic that says, where is the weakness in which relationship of accountability? That would perhaps explain why we're observing good outcomes or bad outcomes in the system as a whole. So where are we? We have elaborated this conceptual framework. 4 of the initial countries, India, Tanzania, Vietnam, and Pakistan, have done or are doing, and 2 of the new countries, Ethiopia and Indonesia, are starting a threefold diagnostic based on this framework. The first is a diagnostic of outcomes and inputs, that is, what do we actually know about the performance of the system? Is it a well-performing system, badly performing system, both in terms of enrollments, equity, outcome, learning outcomes, and what do we know about the proximate determinants of those outcomes? The second is a system diagnostic proper, in which we have modestly modified questions derived from the Saber experience, because the Saber questions themselves were derived from the WDR framework, so there's some intellectual coherence to this. The Saber framework spent a lot of effort in reviewing the relevant empirical literatures and designing questions that they intended to be related to the evidence about what made for effective components of functional subsystems. And third, then we want each of the research teams to be able to express their research goals in terms of this conceptual framework. That is, if Ethiopia is undertaking the following reform, our hypothesis is this reform will be effective to the extent that it actually changes the system incentives. So that's where we are right now. We are not at the point of disseminating the outcomes of this diagnostic. These are all in preliminary stages, but we are sharing, and the rest of the people that are there with you will share so far their experience in attempting to bring this framework to bear on actual country experiences. So thank you very much. I'll turn it over to the speakers that are there live. Thank you.